Okay, there we go. Zoom is already acting up on me. Yay. Okay, so good morning. Welcome to day 2. It looks like our participant numbers are a little lower than signed up, but that's okay, no problems. Let's start with answering, or actually we're gonna have Anthony start real quick with a little thing about coin flips in US public forum and how that can play in strategy. And then we will get to answering questions that pop up in the chat or over the sound. So that's how we're gonna go. Thanks.
Hi, good to see you all this morning. So yeah, like Shanna said, I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about a question that came up that I didn't cover yesterday because this is not going to be a part of modified public forum debates in the near future. So this is not going to be part of the rules for this coming year. It's just something that is a feature of US public forum debate and something that may be introduced a little bit down the line. And that's this idea of a coin flip. So in US public forum, at the beginning of every round, there is a coin flip, and the team that wins the coin flip gets to choose one of two things. They can either pick which side they want to be, so they can pick whether they want to be pro or con, or they can pick whether they want to go first or second. So if you remember when I was going through the order of speeches last time, I kind of outlined that the pro always goes first. And that will be true for this coming season. But in the version of public forum where there is a coin flip, there's a change to that, which is that a team could actually choose to be con and end up going first. So the order of the speeches can change a little bit depending on this coin flip thing. In terms of how this affects strategy, usually in US public forum, the winner of the coin flip will choose to speak second. And the reason for this, if you think about it, is fairly intuitive, which is that the person who speaks last gets to make their closing arguments last. They leave kind of the last impression for the judge, which the conventional wisdom is that that's kind of more persuasive because the judge remembers better what they saw the most recently. And people also tend to choose second because the person who goes last already knows everything that their opponents have said, right? Whereas if you're going first, you not only have to answer everything your opponent has already said, but you have to predict what your opponent is going to say in their last speech and kind of anticipate that and preempt a little bit what their closing arguments are going to be. So usually when there's a coin flip, people will try to pick to be the second speaker. Oh, and I guess I don't think I said this explicitly, but so the winner gets to pick one of these two things. So the winner can either choose to go first or second, or they can choose their side. And the loser of the coin flip gets to choose the other one of those options. So let's say Shanna and I are flipping a coin. I win the coin flip. I pick to go second. Shanna can then pick whether she wants to be pro or con. Or alternatively, if I win the coin flip and maybe I really like to be pro on a specific topic, so maybe I choose to be pro, and then Shanna can choose whether she wants to go first or second. So it's a little bit complicated, and for a variety of reasons, we're not adding that into modified public forum until possibly later down the line. But I felt that I should mention that just because this is an important feature of US public forum. Any questions about how that works or kind of why most teams end up choosing to go second, or does that generally make sense to people? All right. It looks like we do not have any questions about coin flips. So if there are no questions about that, let's talk through some of the other questions that we've gotten. So I believe we have 2 questions in the chat so far. So I see a question from Wendy. So Wendy asks, I found myself still confused about the uniqueness of a contention. Would you mind explaining it again and providing more examples? Sure. So uniqueness, the reason it's called uniqueness is you are saying that the cost or the benefit the contention is describing is unique to your side. So one way you can think of it is, let's say you're comparing 2 different options, and we can use the example that we use with the students in our Toolman's model exercise, which is traveling to another country. So let's say we're comparing 2 different places to travel, and I don't know, one person is proposing to go to Northern Europe and another person is proposing to go to Brazil, for example. I don't know. So if the person saying we should go to Brazil brings up the argument that's like, hey, going to Northern Europe is really, really expensive, and the person saying to go to Europe says, well, going to Brazil is also really expensive, those are non-unique contentions, because no matter which one you pick, you will still end up spending lots of money. So because it's not a unique consequence of voting for either side, of going to France or Northern Europe or going to Brazil, it's not a reason to prefer one over the other. It's something that, regardless of which way you vote, that is something that will happen. On the social media topic, let's say one team says social media is bad for democratic values because social media lets the government spy on people. And the other team says the government has lots of different ways to spy on people. There is no unique role that social media plays in expanding the government's ability to spy. The government is just as good at spying through Google, like Google searches, or your phone calls or your texts, right? If that's true, and government spying is not a unique problem with social media, then we can't really say, oh, we should reject social media because the government could spy through social media. The government has so many other ways to spy, right? There's no uniqueness to that contention. There's nothing unique about social media that causes that negative outcome. Does that make sense? Or does that help?
Yes, I think that's kind of helpful. Thank you. And that actually echoes a little bit to me, to the inherency and policy debate. Yeah, so it's kind of like inherency is like the questions that we have, or the harm that we have really comes from the status quo. So here,
so the idea of inherency, it actually emerges from, there was I think the initial phrase that the term inherency comes from is the phrasing that there is an inherent and compelling need for something to change. So the inherent part of that represents the idea that the problems that are trying to be solved are inherent to the status quo, right? So that you need a deviation from the status quo, or you need some kind of change in order to solve them. If things are fine now, right? So if the affirmative plan, if the affirmative team in a policy debate is saying, oh, we need to do the plan, or we need to do the resolution in order to solve, to boost the economy, and the negative team says the economy is doing great now, then the problem is not inherent. There's no problem inherent in the status quo, or there's no uniqueness to the contention about the economy, because the economy is doing great either way. So that is, you are definitely right that those ideas are very similar. The one difference I would say is that part of inherency is the idea that the resolution has not happened yet. So like, if the resolution says, let's take last year's resolution, legalize transgender designation on government ID laws, right? If the government did that, then we would say that the resolution or the plan is no longer inherent because the status quo has aligned itself with the plan. That's not really part of inherency. So that's the only difference that I would say. But I guess philosophically, there are a lot of similarities between them.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. We have a question from, let's see. We're going to scroll back a little bit.
The one about what's needed in the first constructive
Yes.
speeches.
So there is not a strict set of rules, I would say, about what needs to be included in a first constructive speech, and that's going to depend a little bit on the topic. You mentioned that in policy debate, there is a strict requirement to cover stock issues. So stock issues are not unique to policy debate, and if stock issues help you think about some of the ideas in public forum debate, then you can definitely use that idea. Like definitely the idea of significance is important, or the idea of harms is also important, right? The one difference is in policy debate, solvency is something that always matters, right? Because we're focusing on the consequences of a proposal, right? Or the consequences of a policy change. And in public forum, that's not always the case, which I sort of pointed at this when we were talking about links yesterday. So sometimes the public forum resolution might be similar to a policy resolution, and it might focus on a government policy or a plan. And then solvency would be a relevant issue because the contentions being made by the pro team would be similar to advantages in a policy debate. Other times, like this year, the resolution is not focused on a policy change. So it doesn't really make sense to talk about solvency, right? Because the resolution is just a truth statement and we're debating if it's wrong or correct. So, short answer is there's definitely not a rule that says you need to check all of the stock issue boxes. And I would think of it more in terms of covering those categories of arguments I was describing earlier. So making sure you have a uniqueness argument, a link argument, and an impact argument for your contentions. And definitions as well, whenever that is helpful to your argument. But I wouldn't say that stock issues are a strict rule of any kind. Does that help?
Yeah, yes. So it depends on the proposition. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. See, I think
sorry.
the next one is applying the warrant during the debate. So is that the question? Is that the next one you have in your list? Because
yeah.
Okay, my chat reset itself when it logged me out. So, so this is a really good question. So first, with Toulmin's model, the thing to remember is Toulmin says, or Toulmin believes, that a warrant is meant to connect your claim and then your evidence and explain why they matter and what they prove or what their purpose of existence is. So Toulmin says that you should not provide a warrant before evidence because you haven't given us the evidence. And that the warrant's job is to provide the answers to the questions you may have about evidence or about reading things. So for example, let's say that our claim is social media is bad for, and I'm going to put this in the chat. Social media is bad for, or is bad for an informed electorate. Okay. Which means, you know, the people that are voting and everything like that, are they educated? Do they look? So let's say we have evidence from Dr. George in 2020. And he said that studies have shown that voters will go to the polls and vote based on advertisements they have seen on social media, and they do not fact check the advertisements. So let's say that's his evidence. It's the study he did. The warrant would be, since voters do not fact check the advertisements they see on social media, the electorate, voters are not educated and elect unfit representatives to office. I can't spell today. Representatives to office. Okay. So what that's showing is, all right, I'm making this claim that social media harms our electorate, or an electorate, or a voting body, or a ruling body. I have evidence from this guy who went and did whatever scientific study, probably asked people questions, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then I make the connection that being an uneducated voter is what impacts our electorate, because we are not making the smartest choices. And so that is bad. That's Toolman's model. That's one we went over yesterday. As it's come up, we've gotten some comments and questions last night and today of, you know, is this the only way to do it? No, there's a bunch of other ways that argument people have come up with. There's Monroe's motivated sequence. There's a bunch of other ways for you to make a persuasive argument. And what I found since I have been teaching Toolman, which I started teaching Toolman in 2013, and from like 2013 to about 2015, I was trying out different argument models and stuff with debate classes. Toolman's the one that has made the most sense to my students. It takes practice. And, you know, there's times where even I would think something will have a warrant, but after, you know, looking at it again, it might not. So it's not something that you're ever going to be perfect at. And it takes a lot of practice of retooling your brain to be able to look for this mathematical equation, especially because when things are written in academic publishings, the warrant may be in a weird place because that person did not use Toolman's model to write their argument. And that's okay. You can use whatever, as long as you're making an argument, you have your claim, your warrant, and your evidence. The order is not 100% important. And you'll always find academics that argue about it, of what the order should be and how should it go and what's the best way and all that stuff. But that's how a warrant works. Does this help at all? I missed the name of who asked it. Chelsea, does this help?
Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Awesome. These are great questions this morning. Do we have any other questions this morning?